When Nathaniel Cross raised his revolver at the woman bleeding in his barn, he had one question burning in his mind: how many more ghosts from his past would Montana's winter deliver to his door? 6 years. 6 years he'd lived with the certainty that his wife Maggie had died in that blizzard, frozen somewhere in the mountains, her body never recovered. 6 years of guilt, of wondering if he'd driven her to run into that storm. 6 years of believing he knew the whole terrible truth, but Josephine Hail didn't come to his isolated ranch to confirm what he knew. She came bearing a photograph that would destroy everything, a picture of Maggie alive in Denver, standing beside a man and child. Taken just months before her real death, his wife hadn't died 6 years ago. She'd escaped. And now her sister stood in his barn with bullet wounds from criminals hunting her, demanding he face the truth. Maggie had secrets. Secrets about his own brother Samuel. Secrets that would unravel not just his marriage, but everything he thought he understood about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. If you're ready for a story about the lies we tell ourselves, the truths that set us free, and the unexpected love that rises when we're brave enough to face our darkest hours, then stay with me until the very end, and please, hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of redemption and second chances travels across the world. Because some endings are really beginnings. And sometimes the greatest love of your life arrives carrying the worst news you'll ever hear. The gun barrel gleamed dull silver in the lamplight. Nathaniel Cross held it steady, aimed at the woman's chest, his finger resting on the trigger with the ease of a man who'd killed before when necessary. "Give me one reason," he said, voice low and dangerous, "one reason I shouldn't pull this trigger." "You brought death to my door." Josephine Hail met his gaze without flinching, despite the fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on her shoulder. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, and her hazel eyes, so achingly familiar it made his chest tight, held neither fear nor pleading. "Only a terrible, quiet determination, because if you do," she said, each word deliberate, "you'll never know the truth about Maggie." The name hit him like a physical blow. His hand trembled. Just once. Just enough that she saw it, the truth. Nathaniel's laugh was bitter as winter wind. The truth died 6 years ago in a blizzard. Same as she did, no. Josephine's voice cut through his certainty like a blade through ice. It didn't. And neither did she. December 1884. Montana Territory. The snow had been falling for 2 days straight, transforming Nathaniel's ranch into an isolated white fortress. He stood at the barn door, watching the storm rage across the mountains. And felt nothing. Numbness had become his most faithful companion over the 6 years since Maggie vanished. He was checking the horses when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or wildlife. A horse's distressed whinny, followed by a crash. Nathaniel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Through the curtain of snow, he saw a dark shape near his gate. A horse, riderless, wild-eyed. And on the ground, he was running before he made the conscious decision to move. The woman lay crumpled in the snow, one arm twisted beneath her at an unnatural angle. Blood stained the white powder around her shoulder, not from the fall. This was older. A gunshot wound, partially bandaged with torn fabric. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Dressed in traveling clothes completely inadequate for Montana winter. Already her lips were turning blue. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, light, so terrifyingly light, and carried her toward the house. The mare followed, too exhausted to flee. Inside, he laid her on the floor near the fireplace and worked with the efficiency of a man who'd seen his share of injuries. Strip the wet clothes. Wrap in blankets. Check for broken bones. Tend the gunshot wound. The bullet had gone clean through the shoulder. Amateur bandaging, done in haste. The wound was inflamed but not infected yet. She'd been lucky. Or maybe just stubborn enough to refuse to die. As he worked, Nathaniel studied her face. Something about her features nagged at him, the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. Familiar in a way that made his chest ache with phantom pain, she stirred as he finished wrapping her shoulder properly. Her eyes flickered open, hazel shot through with amber, like autumn leaves catching sunlight, those eyes. He knew those eyes, where? Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, my ranch. Montana Territory. You're safe. He kept his tone neutral, professional. Who shot you? Her gaze sharpened, focusing on his face. She went very still. Then, with effort, she spoke two words that changed everything. Nathaniel Cross. He rocked back on his heels. How do you know my name? Because, she said, and he heard grief crack through her voice like ice breaking, I'm Josephine Hail. Maggie's sister. And I have something you need to see. The world tilted. Nathaniel stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the water basin. Maggie didn't have a sister, she did. Josephine struggled to sit up, wincing. We weren't close. Our parents made sure of that after she married you and moved to Montana. They said she'd shamed the family by choosing frontier life. When she left, they forbade me from even speaking her name. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Maggie had mentioned her family exactly twice in their 5 years of marriage, both times to say they wanted nothing to do with her after the wedding. Maggie's dead, Nathaniel said flatly. She died 6 years ago. Disappeared in a blizzard and never came back, that's what you thought. Josephine reached for the satchel lying near where he'd stripped her wet coat. Her hands shook, from cold, from pain, from something else. But you were wrong. She pulled out a leather folder, water-stained and worn. Opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph. Nathaniel's breath stopped. The woman in the photograph was older than he remembered, thinner, with new lines around her eyes. But it was unmistakably Maggie. His Maggie. Standing in front of a wooden building, squinting slightly against bright sun, Denver sun, not Montana winter, and beside her stood a man, middle-aged and kind-faced. His arm rested casually around her shoulders. At her other side, holding her hand, was a child. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. The photograph was dated on the back, May 1883, 1 year ago. Maggie had been alive 1 year ago, no. The word came out strangled. This is fake. Some kind of, it's not. Josephine's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Maggie survived that night. She made it to a coaching station, then to a town. Then to Denver. She lived there for 6 years, Nathaniel. She just died 2 months ago. The folder slipped from Nathaniel's numb fingers. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room spun. Maggie was alive. Had been alive. For 6 years while he'd mourned her, blamed himself, built his entire world around the stone-hard certainty of her death, she'd been in Denver. Living. Breathing. Standing in sunshine with a man and child who weren't him. Why? The question ripped out of him, raw and bleeding. Why didn't she come back? I don't know all of it. She wouldn't tell me everything in her letters. Josephine pulled out another envelope, thick, filled with folded papers. But she left these for you. Ruth Callahan, the woman who owned the boarding house where Maggie lived, sent them to me after she died. With instructions to bring them to you. Nathaniel stared at the envelope like it might bite. Letters, her journal. From the last 6 years. And a final letter she wrote before she passed. Josephine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I haven't read them all. Ruth said they were meant for you. He wanted to throw them in the fire. Wanted to watch Maggie's words burn to ash and pretend this night had never happened. But his hand, traitorous thing, reached out and took the envelope. The paper was soft with handling, yellowed slightly. On the front, in Maggie's familiar slanted handwriting, for Nathaniel. The truth I was too afraid to tell. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside. Josephine had accepted a blanket and coffee, settling into the chair across from him with visible exhaustion. The color was returning to her face, but the pain lines around her mouth spoke to injuries beyond the shoulder wound. "Who shot you?" Nathaniel asked, delaying the inevitable moment when he'd have to open that envelope. "Men from Denver." "Criminals." Josephine's jaw tightened. "It's complicated, uncomplicated." She studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh her options. Then she sighed. "I'm not just a schoolteacher, Mr. Cross. I'm also a journalist. I investigate stories for the Denver Tribune, under a man's name. Of course. For the past year, I've been tracking a human trafficking ring operating out of the city." That explained the guarded way she held herself, the sharpness in her eyes. "And Maggie worked at the boarding house where some of these women were taken. She saw things. Heard things. Before she died, she told Ruth Callahan about it. Ruth told me." Josephine's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "I've been gathering evidence. The men I'm after found out. They want to silence me before I can publish, so you led them here. It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. I didn't mean to. I thought I'd lost them in Wyoming. But they're more determined than I realized." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm sorry. I didn't come to bring you danger. I came because Maggie asked Ruth to make sure you got these letters. And because..." Her voice softened. "Because you deserve to know she didn't die that night. That whatever happened, it wasn't your fault, wasn't his fault, but the memory rose unbidden, that last night." The argument. Maggie's tear-streaked face as she screamed at him. "You don't see me, Nathaniel. You never did. I'm just another piece of this ranch to you, and him, tired and frustrated after a brutal day of lost cattle. If you hate it here so much, then leave," the door slamming. The sound of her running into the storm. And him, too angry and too proud to follow immediately. By the time he went after her, the snow had already covered her tracks. He'd searched for 3 days. Found nothing. The sheriff had declared her dead by misadventure, a tragic victim of Montana's cruel winter. For 6 years, he believed that. Believed his own words had sent her to her death, but she hadn't died. She'd run. Escaped. And never looked back. "I need to stable your horse," Nathaniel said abruptly, standing. He couldn't sit here anymore, couldn't feel the weight of those letters and that photograph in Josephine's pitying eyes. "Then I'll fix you something to eat. You can sleep in the spare room upstairs." "Nathaniel, don't." His voice came out harder than he intended. "Just, don't." "Not yet." He grabbed his coat and hat, and walked out into the storm. Nathaniel didn't return for over an hour. When he finally came back inside, snow-dusted and silent, Josephine had fallen into an exhausted sleep in the chair. The letters lay on the table where he'd left them, untouched. He stood in the doorway, dripping melting snow, and looked at her properly for the first time. She was beautiful in a quieter way than Maggie had been, less bright flash and more steady flame. Where Maggie had been all golden curls and quick laughter, Josephine was dark hair and serious eyes and a stillness that spoke of carefully guarded depths. But those eyes. Those goddamn eyes were exactly the same. Nathaniel moved to the fireplace, added wood with mechanical precision, and stood watching the flames catch and grow. The heat beat against his face, but he felt cold down to his bones. Behind him, Josephine stirred but didn't wake. Her breathing was even, peaceful. The sleep of someone who'd been running too long and finally found sanctuary. His gaze drifted to the photograph on the table. Maggie, frozen in time. Alive in Denver while he built a monument to her memory here. Who was the man? The child. Slowly, as if his hand belonged to someone else, Nathaniel picked up the journal. Open to the first page, November 15th, 1878, I don't know if I'll ever send this to Nathaniel. I don't know if I have the right. But I have to write it down, have to get these words out before they poison me from the inside. I survived the storm. Made it to a coaching station half dead from cold. They took me in, warmed me, fed me. Asked where I was going, I told them Denver. I should have said Montana. Should have said take me home to my husband. But when I opened my mouth, that's what came out. Denver. As if some part of me already knew the truth I was too afraid to face. I can't go back. Not after what happened. Not after what I did. Nathaniel, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The handwriting blurred. Nathaniel realized his hands were shaking. He forced himself to keep reading. To turn the pages, to let Maggie's voice from beyond the grave wash over him. She wrote of arriving in Denver with nothing. Of Ruth Callahan taking her in, giving her work at the boarding house. Of the overwhelming relief of being somewhere Nathaniel's shadow didn't fall, where she could breathe without the weight of her failure crushing her. Failure. The word appeared again and again, and then, 20 pages in, the truth that shattered everything. I was pregnant, Nathaniel. That night I ran. I was carrying our child. 3 months along. I hadn't told you yet because I was afraid. Afraid it wouldn't survive. Afraid I wouldn't survive. Afraid of so many things, but I never got the chance to be afraid of the right things. I lost the baby 2 weeks after I arrived in Denver. The doctor said it was the trauma. The cold. The stress. Maybe it would have happened anyway. But I'll never know. All I know is that I woke up bleeding and by morning, it was over. Our child was gone. And I was alone in a strange city with nothing left but shame. How could I come back after that? How could I face you and say I ran away pregnant and lost our baby because I was too weak to stay? You would have hated me. I hated myself. The journal dropped from Nathaniel's hands. A baby, Maggie had been pregnant. They'd been going to have a child. And she'd lost it, alone, afraid, in a city where she knew no one, while he'd been here. Mourning her, she'd been there, mourning their child. And the distance between them might as well have been the space between stars. The sound that came from Nathaniel's throat wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. It was something raw and animal, the sound of a man breaking open after holding himself together too long. He sank to his knees on the floor, pressed his palms to his eyes, and let the grief he'd locked away for 6 years come pouring out. Not for the wife he'd lost. But for the child he'd never known existed. For the woman who'd carried that secret alone. For the marriage that had died long before Maggie disappeared into the snow, when Josephine's hand touched his shoulder, gentle. Tentative, he didn't pull away. He let her kneel beside him, let her arms come around him, and he wept into the shoulder of a woman he'd only just met while the ghosts of his past rose up to claim their due. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, for the first time in 6 years, Nathaniel Cross allowed himself to feel everything, and in the shadows by the window, barely visible through the snow-blurred glass, a dark figure on horseback watched the house before turning and disappearing into the white wilderness. The hunters had found their prey. Morning came pale and merciless. Nathaniel woke on the floor by the fireplace, stiff and aching, with no memory of falling asleep. The embers had burned down to ash. Beside him, wrapped in a blanket, Josephine slept with her injured shoulder carefully protected. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and moved to the window. The storm had passed. The world outside was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, pristine and blinding in the early light. Beautiful. Deceptive. Like everything else in his life, apparently, the journal lay where he dropped it. Nathaniel picked it up, ran his fingers over Maggie's handwriting, and felt nothing. Not numbness this time. Just exhaustion. The kind that came from wringing out every emotion until only hollow emptiness remained. How much did you read? He turned. Josephine was awake, watching him with those too familiar eyes. Her dark hair was tangled, her face pale with pain, but she sat up straight despite the obvious cost. Enough. Nathaniel's voice came out rough, amused. She was pregnant, I know. Ruth told me. Josephine's expression was careful, compassionate. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, did you know? Before you came here, Ruth mentioned it. But Maggie's journal. I haven't read most of it. She asked that you see it first. Josephine pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I only know what Ruth chose to tell me. Nathaniel turned back to the window. The man in the photograph. Who is he? I don't know. Ruth didn't mention anyone. The child, Ruth's daughter. Maggie helped raise her after Ruth's husband died. They weren't. Maggie didn't have other children, if that's what you're asking. Something in his chest loosened fractionally. Not relief. Not exactly. But something close to it. There's coffee, he said, changing the subject before the weight of it could crush him again. I'll make breakfast. Then we need to talk about those men hunting you, Nathaniel, later. He cut her off gently but firmly. Let me do something normal first. Something that doesn't require thinking about dead wives and lost children. Please. Josephine nodded understanding and said nothing more. They ate in silence. Eggs, bread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Practical frontier fare. Nathaniel watched Josephine struggle to cut her food one-handed, finally reached over and did it for her without comment. She flushed but accepted the help. Tell me about these men, he said when they'd finished. Everything. Josephine set down her coffee cup. The trafficking ring operates out of several Denver establishments. Saloons, boarding houses, even some legitimate businesses. They target young women, immigrants, mostly, or girls from poor families. Promise them work, then sell them to brothels up and down the territory, and Maggie witnessed this. She overheard conversations. Saw transactions. Ruth's boarding house was across from one of their fronts. Josephine's mouth tightened. She told Ruth about it maybe a month before she died. Ruth wanted to go to the police, but Maggie made her promise not to. Said it was too dangerous, but you went anyway. After she died, yes. No hesitation, no apology. Someone had to. The police in Denver are either incompetent or bought. So I started investigating under my pen name, J.T. Hail. Gathered evidence, interviewed victims. I was close to publishing when they found out who I really was. How? Josephine's hand drifted unconsciously to her wounded shoulder. Someone at the Tribune sold me out. One of the editors I trusted. They ambushed me outside Ruth's boarding house 3 days ago. I barely escaped. Why come here? Why not go to the law in Wyoming? Or somewhere closer, because Maggie's last request was that you get these letters. And because. She hesitated, then continued quietly. Because I failed her once before. I'm not doing it again. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Josephine stood and moved to the window, putting distance between them. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. The night Maggie disappeared, the night she ran into the storm, I knew about it. She'd written to me 2 days before. A letter that arrived while you thought she was dead. Nathaniel went very still. She told me she was planning to leave. Said she couldn't stay with you anymore, that something had happened she couldn't forgive herself for. She begged me not to tell anyone, especially not you. Josephine's shoulders hunched. And I didn't. I kept her secret. Even after I heard she'd gone missing, I said nothing. You let me think she was dead, yes. The word was barely a whisper. I told myself I was honoring her wishes. That she was an adult who'd made her choice. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was 20 years old, terrified of my parents, terrified of getting involved in something messy. So I did nothing, She turned to face him, and Nathaniel saw tears tracking down her face. For 6 years, I've lived with that guilt. Wondering if I'd told someone, if I'd reached out to you or the authorities, would Maggie have come home? Would she have survived? Would that baby? Her voice broke. I came here to give you these letters because I owe it to her. And to you. I should have helped you 6 years ago. At least I can do this now. The rage Nathaniel expected didn't come. Instead, he felt a strange, distant understanding. We all made choices we regret. I told her to leave if she hated it so much. You kept her secret. Maggie ran instead of telling me the truth. We're all guilty. We're all victims. And she's still dead. Josephine wiped her eyes roughly. I'm sorry, so am I. Nathaniel stood, moved to the window beside her. But being sorry doesn't change anything. We can't go back. We can only decide what we do now. And what do you want to do? He looked out at the snow-buried landscape. I want to read the rest of that journal. I want to understand what happened, all of it. And I want to make sure you don't get killed by criminals while you're under my roof. I can leave. I don't want to put you in danger. Too late. Nathaniel's mouth quirked without humor. If they followed you here, they already know where you are. Running now would just get you killed. At least here, you've got shelter, supplies, and someone who knows how to shoot. You'd risk yourself for me? You don't even know me. No. But Maggie did. And despite everything, she cared about you enough to write to you for 6 years. That's worth something. Josephine studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found made her nod slowly. Thank you, don't thank me yet. First, tell me everything about these men. Numbers, weapons, tactics. If they're coming, I want to be ready. They spent the morning preparing. Nathaniel checked his ammunition, cleaned his rifles, positioned spare weapons throughout the house. Josephine, despite her injury, proved surprisingly capable. She knew her way around firearms and had a sharp tactical mind. Journalist training? Nathaniel asked dryly as she efficiently loaded a revolver. My father was a Union officer. He taught all his children to shoot, boys and girls alike. Said the frontier didn't care about propriety. A bitter smile. It's the only useful thing he ever gave me. By noon, they'd fortified the ranch house as best they could. Nathaniel went out to check the perimeter, looking for tracks. What he found made his blood run cold. Hoofprints. Multiple horses. Circling the property at a distance, staying just beyond rifle range. Fresh, made sometime during the night or early morning. They were being watched. He returned to find Josephine reading through Maggie's journal, her face pale and drawn. They're here, he said without preamble. At least 3. Maybe 4 riders. Keeping their distance for now, Josephine looked up sharply. Why haven't they attacked? Scouting. Learning the layout. Waiting to see if you're alone or if you've got help. Nathaniel checked the loads in his rifle. They'll move tonight. Under cover of darkness, then we have until sunset. She set down the journal. Nathaniel, there's something else in here you need to see. About why Maggie really left. His stomach dropped. What? It's not just about the pregnancy. There's more. Josephine's hands trembled slightly as she turned pages. About your brother Samuel. Dead 7 years now in a riding accident. Thrown from a horse and broke his neck. Nathaniel had been with him when it happened, had held him as he died, had buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch. What about Samuel? Josephine handed him the journal, pointed to a specific entry. Her eyes were full of grief and pity. Nathaniel read, and the ground dropped out from under him for the second time in 2 days. April 10, 1878, 3 months before Maggie disappeared. I have to write this down. Have to confess it somewhere, even if only to this page. because I can't carry it alone anymore. Samuel came to the house yesterday. Nathaniel was in town. I was alone, doing laundry, and Samuel stopped by to return some tools he'd borrowed. We talked. Just talked at first. About nothing important, the weather, the ranch, his plans to head east for work. And then somehow we were talking about loneliness. About how hard this life is. How isolating. He said he envied Nathaniel for having me. Said any man would be lucky to call me his wife. I should have stopped him there. Should have sent him away. But I was so desperately lonely, and it had been so long since anyone looked at me like I mattered, and when he touched my hand I didn't pull away. God forgive me, I didn't pull away, it only happened once. One terrible, weak moment. And afterward, we both knew it was wrong. Samuel left the territory 2 weeks later. Neither of us ever spoke of it again. But then he died. Thrown from his horse. And Nathaniel buried him, grieving the brother he loved. And I stood at that grave knowing what we'd done. Knowing I'd betrayed them both. When I discovered I was pregnant a month later, I counted back the days. Tried to figure out if the child was Nathaniel's or Samuel's. The timing made it possible either way, I'll never know. And that not knowing is its own kind of hell. I can't tell Nathaniel. I can't destroy his memory of his brother. I can't take that from him too, so I'll carry this secret. And if the baby comes, I'll love it regardless of whose blood runs in its veins. And I'll try every day to be worthy of the good man I married. Even though I'm not sure I ever was. The journal fell from Nathaniel's hands. Again, Maggie. And Samuel, his wife. His brother, together, and a child that might have been either of theirs, lost before anyone could ever know the truth. The rage he'd expected earlier came crashing down now, huge and terrible. Not at Maggie, not anymore. She was dead, beyond the reach of his anger. And not even at Samuel, who'd also paid the ultimate price, though he'd never known about the pregnancy. No, the rage was at the universe itself. At the cruel twist of fate that had taken everyone he loved and left him alone with nothing but betrayal and loss and questions that could never be answered. Nathaniel. Josephine's voice, tentative. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, don't. The word came out harsh. He stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to break something. Just, don't. He grabbed his coat and hat, ignoring her protests, and walked out into the snow. Nathaniel found himself at the grave without consciously choosing the destination. Samuel's marker stood on the hillside overlooking the ranch, a simple wooden cross weathered gray by 7 Montana winters. Samuel Cross 1854 to 1877. Beloved brother, beloved. Nathaniel sank to his knees in the snow before the grave. The cold bit through his pants, into his bones, but he barely felt it. You son of a bitch, he said to the silent marker. You goddamn son of a bitch, but there was no heat in the words. Only exhaustion. He'd loved Samuel. His younger brother by 2 years, quick to laugh and slow to anger. The one who'd helped him build this ranch from nothing, who'd shared his dreams and his struggles. Who'd died too young, too senselessly, and all that time, Samuel had been carrying this secret. This shame. And so had Maggie, 2 people he'd loved, both betraying him, both dying with the truth locked inside. How was he supposed to feel? Rage seemed too simple. Grief too small. There wasn't a word for this hollowed out, scraped-raw feeling. Nathaniel didn't hear Josephine approach. Didn't realize she was there until her hand rested gently on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she said again. Quieter this time. I know it doesn't help. But I am, they didn't mean to hurt me. The word surprised him, coming from some place deeper than conscious thought. That's what makes it worse. They both cared about me. And they still did this. People make mistakes when they're lonely. When they're desperate for connection. Josephine knelt beside him in the snow. It doesn't excuse it. But it makes it human. Nathaniel looked at her, really looked. At her wounded shoulder, her exhausted face, the determination in her eyes that had driven her across territories to deliver letters to a stranger. This woman had her own guilt, her own regrets. And somehow, she was still here. Still trying. Do you think they loved each other? He asked. Or was it just a moment? I think it was both. Maggie's later entries talk about Samuel. She cared for him. Grieved him deeply when he died. But she also knew it was wrong. Knew she loved you more. Josephine's hand tightened on his shoulder. Sometimes people love multiple truths at once. It doesn't make any of them less real. Snow began to fall again, light flakes drifting down from a gray sky. Nathaniel watched them settle on Samuel's grave, on Josephine's dark hair, on his own hands. I don't know how to forgive this, he said. Maybe you don't have to. Not yet. Maybe you just have to decide you're not going to let it destroy you. They knelt there together in the falling snow, two near strangers united by grief and secrets and the ghosts of people they'd both loved and lost. And slowly, degree by painful degree, Nathaniel felt something in his chest begin to shift, not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the possibility of it. Someday, we should get back, Josephine said eventually. It'll be dark soon, Nathaniel nodded. Started to rise. Then stopped. Wait, he pulled the letter from Samuel, the one he'd found hidden in the wall during repairs, from his pocket. He'd carried it with him without realizing. Now he smoothed it out. Read the words one more time. Maggie, I know this is wrong. But I can't stop thinking about you. If the child is mine, come to Denver. I'll take care of you both. I'll make it right. So Samuel had known about the pregnancy. Had offered to step up, to take responsibility. He died before he could make good on that promise, but the intent had been there. Nathaniel folded the letter carefully and placed it on the grave, weighted down with a stone. Rest now, he said to his brother. Both of you. I'll carry it from here. When they returned to the house, full dark had fallen. And with it, the attack came. Gunfire shattered the kitchen window. Nathaniel shoved Josephine to the floor, grabbed his rifle, and returned fire into the darkness. Muzzle flashes revealed positions, for men. Spread out in a rough semicircle around the front of the house. Stay down, he shouted to Josephine, but she was already moving, crawling to the spare revolver he'd left near the hearth. Despite her injured shoulder, she positioned herself at a side window and fired methodically, covering his blind spot. The fight was brutal and efficient. These weren't amateur thugs, they moved with military precision, suppressing fire while one tried to flank around the barn. Nathaniel caught the flanker with a shot that sent him tumbling into the snow. 3 left, then Josephine cried out. Nathaniel whirled. Blood bloomed fresh through her bandages. She'd torn open the wound, returning fire. In that moment of distraction, one of the attackers rushed the door. Nathaniel met him with the rifle but to the face, followed by a point-blank shot that ended the threat permanently. 2 left, Joe. He used her name for the first time, not Josephine. Can you shoot? Yes. Gritted through pain, cover the back. They'll try to flank again. She moved without argument. Brave. Foolishly, admirably brave, the remaining 2 attackers seemed to realize they'd miscalculated. They pulled back, using the barn for cover, then retreated entirely. Hoofbeats receded into the night. Nathaniel waited, tense, rifle trained on the darkness. 1 minute. 2. 5, nothing, they're gone. Josephine said. She was leaning heavily against the wall, face pale. For now, Nathaniel moved to her side, pulled back the bandage. The wound had reopened, bleeding freely. Damn it. He guided her to a chair. You shouldn't have been shooting, you would have died. Simple statement of fact, maybe. He worked quickly, cleaning and rebandaging. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline still singing through his veins. "But you're hurt worse now, worth it." Their eyes met. Held, and something shifted in the air between them. Something dangerous and electric and entirely inappropriate given that his wife's sister sat bleeding because of choices made by people long dead. "Nathaniel," Josephine breathed. He was leaning toward her before conscious thought engaged. Her good hand came up, touched his face, and the contact sent electricity down his spine. Wrong. This was wrong on every level. Too soon, too complicated, Josephine pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was desperate and afraid and tasted like blood and smoke. The kiss of two people who just survived death and needed to feel alive. Nathaniel kissed her back with 6 years of loneliness and loss pouring through him. His hands framed her face, careful of her injury, and he kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning, when they broke apart. Both breathing hard, reality crashed back. "I'm sorry," Josephine said. That was, "Don't." Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Don't apologize. Not for that, this is insane. You just found out about Maggie. I'm her sister. We barely know each other, I know." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Doesn't change the fact that I've been falling for you since the moment you opened those gray eyes in my house." Josephine's breath hitched. "Nathaniel," the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast cut her off. But this time, it wasn't attackers. This time, a single rider pulled up to the house calling out in a reedy, elderly voice, "Nathaniel Cross. It's Father Thomas. Don't shoot." Father Thomas Brennan looked every one of his 60-some years as he stumped into the house, snow clinging to his black cassock. He was a circuit preacher who visited the ranch twice a year, the only person Nathaniel had maintained any regular contact with over the past 6 years. "Heard gunshots," Thomas said, accepting hot coffee with gnarled hands. "Came to see if you'd finally lost your mind or if you had trouble," Nathaniel confirmed. He introduced Josephine, explained the situation in brief strokes, leaving out several key details. Thomas listened, sharp eyes missing nothing. Especially not the way Nathaniel stood protectively near Josephine, or the fresh blood on her bandages. "I can take Miss Hail to town," Thomas offered. "Sheriff's there. He can protect her better than." "No." Both Nathaniel and Josephine spoke simultaneously. Thomas raised a bushy eyebrow. "No, the men who attacked will be watching the roads," Josephine explained. "And I don't trust the local law not to be compromised. Some of these trafficking rings have long reach." "Then what's your plan?" "Stay here. Weather the siege." Nathaniel's jaw set stubbornly. "They've already lost 2 men. They won't risk a third direct assault. They'll wait, try to starve us out or catch us when we leave. But we've got supplies for a month if needed." Thomas studied them both, then sighed. "There's something else. Something I came to tell you, Nathaniel. About Maggie." The room went very still. "What about her?" Nathaniel asked. "She came to me the night before she disappeared." Thomas set down his coffee cup. "To confess," Josephine made a small, choked sound. Nathaniel's hands clenched. What did she confess? Even as he asked, he already knew. Already felt the weight of the answer settling over him. "I can't tell you that. The seal of confession is absolute." Thomas's face was deeply lined with sorrow. "But I can tell you that she was carrying a terrible burden. Guilt over something she'd done. Fear of what it meant." "Did she mention Samuel?" Thomas's expression was answer enough. "I thought so." Nathaniel turned away, stared out the window at the darkness. "Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything that doesn't violate your vows?" "Only this." Thomas stood, moved to stand beside him. "She loved you, Nathaniel. Whatever else was true, whatever else she'd done, she loved you. The depth of her guilt came from how much she cared. People don't agonize over betraying those they don't love. The words should have been comforting. Somehow, they just made everything hurt more. Thank you for coming, Father, Josephine said quietly. It means a lot, Thomas nodded, pulled on his coat. Before he left, he turned back to them both. Miss Hale, might I have a word? Outside, Josephine glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded. She followed the priest out into the snow. They spoke in low voices for perhaps 5 minutes. When Josephine returned, her face was ashen. What did he say? Nathaniel asked. He told me. She swallowed hard. He told me that Maggie confessed to being with Samuel. And that she believed the child might have been his. But she also said something else. What? That if the child had survived and been Samuel's, she would have raised it as yours anyway. Because you were the man she chose. The man she wanted to build a life with. The affair was a mistake born of loneliness, but her love for you was real. Nathaniel absorbed this. Turned it over in his mind like a stone with sharp edges. Does that help? Josephine asked. Knowing that, I don't know, he admitted. Ask me in a year. Fair enough. They stood in silence, the house settling around them. Outside, Father Thomas's horse faded into the distance. The men will come back, Josephine said. Maybe not tonight, but soon. I know, we should prepare, we should. Neither of them moved. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. That kiss was a mistake. I know, I was going to say it was the best thing that's happened to me in 6 years. Josephine's head snapped toward him. Nathaniel, I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. But I'm done lying to myself. He turned to face her fully. I'm done pretending. Maggie and Samuel lied because they were afraid of the truth. I won't make that mistake. So here's my truth. You walked into my life 2 days ago and turned everything upside down. You brought me pain and truth and hope all mixed together. And when those men tried to kill you, I realized something. What? I don't want you to leave. Not when this is over. Not when you're safe. Not ever. Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. You don't mean that. You're just, I mean it. More than I've meant anything in years. He closed the distance between them, careful not to jar her injury. I can't offer you much. A broken-down ranch. A man with more ghosts than future. But if you'll stay, I swear I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of it. Nathaniel, I live in Denver. I have a career. This trafficking story, finish it. Publish it. Save those women. Then come back. Or don't. Or I'll come with you. I don't care where we are as long as we're together. This is insane, probably. He smiled, small and genuine. But I've spent 6 years being careful and safe and alone. I'm done with that. Life's too short and too cruel not to grab happiness when it appears. Even if it appears at the worst possible time in the worst possible way. Josephine laughed through her tears. You're asking me to build something real on top of all this grief and mess and complication. Yes, that's probably the worst foundation for a relationship in history. Probably. And you think it'll work anyway. I think we'll never know unless we try. And I'd rather fail trying than succeed at staying alone. She searched his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right. When this is over, if we survive, we'll try. We'll figure it out together, Nathaniel agreed. He kissed her again, slower this time. Gentler. A promise instead of desperation. Outside, snow continued to fall. And somewhere in the darkness, enemies waited. But inside the ranch house, 2 broken people allowed themselves to hope for the first time in years. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, they had this, and for now, that was enough. The attack came 3 nights later. Nathaniel had known it would. The only question was when and how. The men had pulled back to regroup, but they wouldn't give up, not with the stakes this high. Human trafficking was a lucrative business, and Josephine's evidence threatened to dismantle an entire network. In the days between, he and Josephine had fallen into a strange rhythm. Working side by side to fortify the ranch. Reading through the rest of Maggie's journal together, letting the truth wash over them in waves. Talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Learning each other in the compressed, intense way of people facing death together, and through it all, the attraction between them had grown, complicated by grief and guilt but undeniable. Now, as darkness fell on the third night, they took their positions. Nathaniel at the front windows. Josephine, shoulder healing but still tender, covering the back door. Rifles loaded. Ammunition within reach. Waiting, the attack. When it came, was different. Smarter, they set fire to the barn. Nathaniel saw the orange glow before he smelled the smoke. Cursed viciously. The horses were screaming inside, 3 animals that hadn't done anything to deserve burning alive. It's a trap, Josephine said from behind him. They want you to run out to save them, I know. His hands clenched on the rifle. But I can't let them burn. Nathaniel, cover me. I'm going to open the barn doors, let the horses run free. Stay here and shoot anything that moves toward the house. That's suicide, maybe. He checked his gun belt, added an extra revolver. But those horses are innocent. And I've got enough on my conscience without adding them to it. He ran before she could argue further. The snow was churned to mud where the attackers had approached. Nathaniel zigzagged, using what cover he could. Gunfire erupted, from the house, Josephine, and from the darkness, enemies. Bullets kicked up snow around his boots. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames licking through gaps in the old wood. The horses inside were wild with terror. Nathaniel hit the doors at a run, through the bar, yanked them open. 3 horses thundered out, eyes rolling white with panic. They scattered into the night, alive. Safe, but the heat and smoke had disoriented Nathaniel. He stumbled, coughing, and in that moment of weakness, someone hit him from behind. He went down hard. Tasted blood. Rolled just in time to avoid a follow-up blow and came up with his revolver drawn. The man facing him was massive, 6.5 feet of muscle and scars. One of the traffickers, clearly the muscle of the operation. And behind him, 2 more stepped out of the smoke. Nathaniel shot the big man's center mass. He went down. But the other 2 rushed him together, and it devolved into brutal close-quarters combat, fists. Knives. One of them tried to strangle him with a length of rope. Nathaniel bit the man's hand until he tasted copper, broke free, and put a bullet through his skull at point-blank range. The third man, younger, faster, got inside Nathaniel's guard. Blade flashed. Pain erupted across Nathaniel's ribs, then the man's head snapped back, blood and bone exploding. He dropped. Josephine stood 10 feet away, rifle smoking, her face a mask of fury and fear. I told you it was suicide, she screamed at him. Nathaniel pressed a hand to his bleeding side. I'm fine, you're bleeding, just a scratch, liar. They stared at each other across the corpse-littered snow. The barn crackled and groaned behind them, collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks. Are there more? Nathaniel asked. I don't think so. I haven't seen anyone else. Josephine lowered her rifle, hurried to his side. Let me see the wound, it can wait. We need to, now, Nathaniel. He let her pull back his coat and shirt. The cut was deep but clean, bleeding freely but not spurting. She tore strips from her petticoat, practical frontier woman, and bound it tight. You should have stayed inside, she muttered. You should have stayed in Denver. I'm serious, so am I. He caught her hand. Thank you for saving my life. Thank me by not doing something stupid like that again. Can't make that promise. Try. He smiled despite the pain, despite the burning barn and dead men and blood soaking through his shirt. For you. I'll try. The barn burned through the night. By morning, all that remained was a blackened skeleton in ash. Nathaniel and Josephine buried the 3 dead men in the frozen ground, hard labor that reopened his wound twice. But there was no choice. They couldn't leave corpses lying around. When it was done, Nathaniel leaned on his shovel and looked at Josephine across the raw earth. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I found a letter. When I was repairing the wall in the house. It was hidden behind a loose board. From Samuel." Josephine went very still. "He wrote to Maggie. Told her he loved her. Told her if the child was his, to come to Denver and he'd take care of her." Nathaniel drew a shaky breath. He died before he could make good on that. But the intent was there. He was trying to do the right thing. Does that help? Josephine asked softly. Knowing he planned to step up, I don't know. It makes it more complicated. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife and running away. He was trying to be honorable. In his own fucked up way. Do you think you can forgive him? Nathaniel considered the question honestly. I think I already have. Not because he deserves it. But because I'm tired of being angry at ghosts. Samuel's dead. Maggie's dead. The child they might have made is dead. And I'm still here. Still alive. And anger is too heavy to carry anymore. Tears tracked through the dirt on Josephine's face. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever heard. Not brave. Just exhausted, no. She moved to him, took his filthy hands in hers. It's brave. Forgiveness always is. They stood there in the ruins of the barn, holding on to each other. 2 survivors in a landscape of loss. I have to finish this, Josephine said eventually. The trafficking story. I need to go back to Denver. Publish the evidence, make sure these bastards face justice. I know, but after that. She met his eyes. After that, if you'll still have me, I'd like to come back. Try this thing between us. See if we can build something real from all this wreckage. I'll still have you, Nathaniel said. A year from now. 5 years. Whenever you're ready. You'd wait, for you. I'd wait a lifetime. She pulled him down into a kiss, tender despite their split lips and bruises, sweet despite the taste of blood and smoke. A kiss that tasted like promise and hope and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, Nathaniel smiled. Though I should probably mention, I'm coming with you, Josephine blinked. What? To Denver? I'm not letting you walk back into a den of criminals alone. Besides, I've been meaning to sell some cattle. Might as well make a trip of it. Nathaniel Cross, are you asking to escort me? Asking to court you properly, actually. With dinners and dances and all the things I never gave Maggie because I was too busy building this ranch. His expression turned serious. I won't make the same mistakes twice. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Josephine laughed through fresh tears. You're impossible. You're stuck with me anyway. Apparently, they left for Denver a week later, after Nathaniel arranged for a neighbor to watch the ranch. The journey took 5 days on horseback, through melting snow and early spring rain. In the city, Josephine went immediately to the Tribune offices with her evidence. The story broke like a thunderstorm, front page for 3 straight days. The police, shamed into action by public outcry, raided the trafficking rings. 14 arrests in the first week. 37 women freed from forced labor. And Ruth Callahan, who'd been quietly gathering her own evidence, testified before a grand jury. It was Ruth who finally gave them the last pieces of Maggie's story. They met her at the boarding house, a warm, motherly woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a kind smile. She served tea and small cakes and looked at Nathaniel with unconcealed compassion. She talked about you every day, Ruth said. Near the end especially. When she knew she was dying, what did she say? Nathaniel's voice was rough, that she'd been a coward. That she should have come back years ago. That she'd let fear of your reaction keep her from the one thing she wanted most, to be your wife again. Ruth pulled out a small wooden box. She left this for you. Asked me to make sure it found its way to you if she didn't survive. Inside the box was Maggie's wedding ring, the simple gold band he'd placed on her finger 11 years ago. She'd kept it. Worn it, from the look of the worn groove in the metal. Never thrown it away. Nathaniel's vision blurred. He lifted the ring, remembered the day he'd first given it to her. How young they'd both been. How hopeful. There's something else you should know, Ruth said gently. The child in that photograph, my daughter Sarah. Maggie helped raise her after my husband passed. She was a wonderful mother figure. Patient, loving. Everything she would have been to her own child if. Ruth trailed off, sniffed. I'm sorry. This must be so hard to hear, no. Nathaniel closed the box carefully. I needed to hear it. Needed to know that she had some happiness. That she wasn't alone, she wasn't alone. But she was lonely. There's a difference. Ruth reached across the table, squeezed his hand. She never stopped loving you, Mr. Cross. And she would be so happy to know you're finding happiness again. Her gaze flicked meaningfully to Josephine. Nathaniel felt heat creep up his neck. We're not, it's all right. Ruth's smile was knowing. Maggie told me about her sister. How smart she was, how brave. She'd approve of this. I know she would. Josephine's hand found Nathaniel's under the table. Squeezed gently. Thank you, he said to Ruth. For everything you did for her. For being her friend when she had no one else. She was easy to love, Ruth said simply. Just like her sister, that evening, back in their hotel, Josephine received a telegram. She read it twice, then handed it to Nathaniel without comment. It was from the Tribune's editor-in-chief. An offer to head their investigative bureau. Double her current salary. A chance to break stories that mattered, to make a real difference, everything she'd ever wanted professionally. It's in Denver, Nathaniel noted. Yes, and the ranch is in Montana, yes. They looked at each other. I don't want you to give this up for me, Nathaniel said carefully. This is your dream. Your calling. And God knows those women need someone like you fighting for them, I know, but I also don't want to lose you. Not when I just found you. Josephine paced the small room, agitated. I spent 6 years feeling guilty about Maggie. 6 years thinking I'd failed her. This job, fighting these trafficking rings, it's my way of making that right. But you. She stopped, faced him. You're my chance at happiness. And I don't know how to choose. Nathaniel stood, moved to her. Took her restless hands in his steady ones. Then don't choose. We'll make it work. Both things. How? I'll move to Denver. Or we'll split time between here and Montana. Or I'll sell the ranch entirely and we'll start fresh somewhere new. I don't care where I live as long as you're there. He lifted her hands to his lips. Don't give up your calling for me. But don't give me up for it either. We'll find a third way. You'd really leave Montana. Your ranch, it's just land and buildings, Joe. Your home. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. She kissed him then, fierce and grateful and full of promise. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with tears. 3 months, she said. Give me 3 months to take this job, set up the bureau, finish the trafficking investigation. Then I'll come back to Montana. We'll have a proper courtship. Do things right, and after that, we'll see. Maybe I'll keep the Denver job and visit Montana when I can. Maybe we'll figure out how to split our time. Maybe something completely different. But we'll figure it out together, Nathaniel agreed. I can live with that, True to her word, Josephine threw herself into her new role. Over the next 3 months, she broke 7 major stories, helped rescue 41 women from forced labor, and became known as one of the most fearless investigative journalists in the territory. And Nathaniel returned to Montana, repaired his ranch, and waited. They wrote letters, long, detailed accounts of their days. Josephine told him about her investigations, her triumphs and frustrations. Nathaniel told her about rebuilding the barn, the spring calving, the slow work of making the ranch profitable again, and through those letters, they fell in love properly. Not in the desperate, grief-fueled rush of their first meeting, but slowly, honestly, with open eyes and open hearts. When 3 months turned into 4, Nathaniel didn't complain. When 4 turned into 5, he understood, her work was important. Lives depended on it, but in late May, as Montana bloomed into full spring, a telegram arrived, coming home. Arriving June 1st, don't make dinner plans. J. Nathaniel read it 3 times. Then he went to town, bought a ring, and started planning. Josephine arrived on a warm June evening, stepping off the stagecoach in the town nearest Nathaniel's ranch. She was windblown and dusty from travel, but to him she'd never looked more beautiful. You came back, he said stupidly. I said I would. She dropped her bag and walked straight into his arms. Did you doubt me? Not for a second. They held each other there on the dusty street, oblivious to curious stares. When they finally pulled apart, Josephine was smiling. So what are these dinner plans I ruined? Come with me and find out. He prepared a picnic, simple frontier fare but presented with care. They rode out to the hill overlooking his ranch, where Samuel's grave stood alongside a new marker. One Nathaniel had commissioned in Denver during his trip. Margaret and Cross 1855 to 1884. Beloved wife finally at peace. Josephine stared at the gravestone, tears streaming down her face. You made her a grave, she deserved one. Even if there's no body, she deserves to be remembered properly. Nathaniel placed wildflowers on both graves. I come here sometimes. Talk to them. Tell them about us. I think they'd approve. I think so too. They ate their picnic as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. And when the food was gone and the stars began to appear, Nathaniel pulled out the ring. I'm going to do this properly, he said. No desperate moments. No life or death drama. Just honest truth. He got down on one knee in the grass. Josephine Hail, you walked into my life carrying pain and truth and hope all tangled together. You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story, that it can be the beginning of something new. You're brave and brilliant and frustratingly stubborn, and I love you more than I thought possible. He held out the ring, simple gold, like Maggie's had been, but with a small sapphire set in it. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, wherever that life takes us? Josephine was crying openly now. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, stood, and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. I have conditions though, Josephine said when they came up for air. Name them. I keep my job in Denver. We split our time, summers here, winters there. And when we have children, we raise them to be brave enough to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Deal. Nathaniel pulled her close. Though I have one condition of my own. What's that? We name our first daughter Margaret. To remember. And our first son Samuel. So they're not forgotten. Fresh tears spilled down Josephine's face. That's perfect. They'd like that, I think so too. They stayed on that hillside long into the night, making plans and promises and dreaming of the future. Behind them, 2 graves stood silent in the starlight. Before them, the ranch spread out, scarred but healing, like the people who called it home. 4 years later, 1888, the ranch house gleamed with fresh paint. The barn, rebuilt after the fire, stood solid and proud. Cattle grazed in healthy numbers across the valley. And in the yard, a dark-haired little girl chased chickens with shrieking laughter. Nathaniel watched from the porch, a son balanced on his hip. Young Samuel, barely a year old, grabbed at his father's beard with determined fists. "Papa, look!" Margaret called. She'd caught a hen, held it triumphantly aloft. "I did it, good job, Maggie girl. Now let it go before your mother sees, too late." Josephine emerged from the house, saw the situation, and raised one eloquent eyebrow. "What did we say about harassing the chickens?" Margaret released the bird with dramatic reluctance. "Not before breakfast, not at all, that's not what Papa said." Josephine turned her raised eyebrow on Nathaniel. He tried to look innocent. "Failed, traitor," she muttered, but she was smiling. She moved to stand beside him, one hand resting on the porch rail. Her left hand, where the sapphire ring caught the morning light. "Your mother's in town," she said. "Stopped by the Tribune office yesterday. Asked when we were coming back to Denver." "What did you tell her?" "Next month. After the spring roundup." Josephine leaned into him. "Ruth wants to see the children. And I have a story to follow up on." "Another trafficking ring?" "No. This one's about land fraud. Might take a few weeks to crack, we'll manage." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head. "We always do." Margaret came barreling up the porch steps, demanding attention. Samuel grabbed a handful of her hair and wouldn't let go. Chaos erupted, laughing, wrestling, gentle parental intervention, and through it all, Nathaniel felt something he'd thought lost forever. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of remembering well. Of honoring the past while living fully in the present. Later, after the children were down for naps and the house was quiet, Nathaniel and Josephine walked up the hill to the graves. They brought wildflowers, Margaret's favorite. "I told them about your latest story," Nathaniel said, placing flowers on both markers. "About the women you saved last month. Maggie would be proud, I hope so." Josephine knelt, traced the carved letters of her sister's name. "I hope they're both proud." "They are. I know they are." Nathaniel pulled out 2 new additions to the grave site, small markers he'd carved himself over the winter. One read, "In memory of a child never born. Loved before ever known." The other, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering with grace." He placed them carefully, one between the 2 graves. Josephine's hand found his. Squeezed tight. "You ready to go back?" she asked. "Yeah. I am." They walked down the hill together, hand in hand, leaving the dead to rest and the living to thrive. Behind them, wildflowers swayed in the Montana wind. Before them, their children's laughter drifted from the house, full of life and promise and all the complicated, beautiful mess of building a future from the ashes of the past. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be, not perfect. Never perfect, but real. Honest. And absolutely worth fighting for. They say you can't build happiness on grief. But I did. We did. Not by forgetting Maggie and Samuel. Not by pretending the pain didn't matter. But by honoring their memory while having the courage to love again. Forgiveness doesn't mean the hurt never happened. It means you're not going to let it define the rest of your life. And second chances, real ones, they don't erase the first try. They just prove that endings aren't always endings. Sometimes they're beginnings we didn't see coming. Josephine and I built our life on complicated ground. On loss and betrayal and guilt and grief. But we also built it on truth. On choosing each other every day. On refusing to let the weight of yesterday crush the possibility of tomorrow. Our children will grow up knowing the truth, all of it. The good and the bad. Because the past isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to learn from, and maybe that's the real redemption. Not forgetting. Not erasing. But remembering with grace and moving forward anyway, together, always together. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories of hope and redemption, And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Montana? Denver? Somewhere halfway around the world? This story traveled from 1884 to today. And I want to know how far it's reached. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, tales of imperfect people finding grace, of second chances rising from impossible odds, of love that doesn't fix broken things but learns to hold them gently. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, your past doesn't define your future. But how you choose to carry it, with bitterness or with grace, that makes all the difference. Until next time, may you have the courage to face your ghosts and the wisdom to know when to let them rest.